It's interesting. I think that this can be one of two things, right? Like it can be the place where you really say, you know what, I'm going to draw a line in the sand here. I'm going to sit with this fear. I'm going to sit with the intensity. I'm going to feel this, and I'm going to make a change. And I'm going to actually use this time in this solitude to do the reading and the work and the inner knowledge to explore this and get honest with myself. Or you can do, what a lot of people are doing and numb it out. I would say that from a really practical perspective, the immune system is made up of 5 key functions, and alcohol negatively affects all 5 of them very dramatically. It's probably one of the worst things you can do. So if you're sitting here taking lots of vitamin C and washing your hands a lot, but you're drinking a lot, you are really, truly putting yourself in a detriment.
Hello, and welcome to another exclusive interview by Recovery Today magazine at Recovery Today magazine, where first and foremost, we're a magazine of hope. Whether you're considering addiction recovery for yourself or a loved one, or you're actively in recovery a short while or many years, you'll find information on all topics related to addiction, recovery, codependency, and living a happy, successful, sober life at Recovery Today. My name is Gaba. I'm the editor of Recovery Today, and I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing another amazing guest. Her name is Annie Grace, and she is the author of This Naked Mind, Control Alcohol and Find Freedom, Discover Happiness and Change Your Life, and the Alcohol Experiment, a 30-day alcohol-free challenge to interrupt your habits and help you take control. She grew up outside of Aspen, Colorado, in a one-room log cabin without running water or electricity. Having discovered a passion for marketing, Annie earned a Master's of Science in Marketing and dove into corporate life. As the youngest vice president in a multinational company at the age of 26, her drinking career began in earnest. At 35, in a global C-level marketing role, she was responsible for marketing in 28 countries. She was drinking almost 2 bottles of wine nightly, knowing she needed to change, but unwilling to submit to a life of deprivation and stigma. Annie Grace embarked on a journey to painlessly gain control of alcohol. For her, that process resulted in no longer wanting to drink. Never happier, she left her executive role to write and share This Naked Mind with the world. And in her free time, she loves to ski and travel. She's been to 26 countries and still counting, and enjoys her beautiful family. Annie Grace lives with her husband and 3 children in the Colorado mountains. Hi, Annie. Welcome.
Hi, Sherry. Thank you so much.
Love having you here, and I'm honored you took the time. You are certainly a trailblazer, and I've been kind of on this journey with you the last few years, so I'm just really excited that you're here. So we're seeing a huge population growing now known as the Sober Curious movement. And so would you define yourself as part of that movement?
I think the alcohol experiment is probably very firmly in that movement, considering it is an experiment about taking 30 days from alcohol. It was not necessarily I didn't even know what the Sober Curious movement was, or there was such a thing when I created the alcohol experiment. My mind was just sort of saying, I wonder if people love a challenge, and I wonder if we could lower the barrier to entry into the conversation, instead of it being a big I need to change my drinking, or I need to stop drinking. And those are great questions, but they take a while for people to have those questions. It takes a while for people to be okay, finally, I think something has to change here. And I said, well, what if it could just be no, let's just do an experiment. Let's just dip a toe, get super curious about what your relationship with alcohol is like, take 30 days off, see what happens, see how you feel. And so that was in 2017. And so, yes, I think that book and that program is firmly in the Sober Curious movement, although I didn't ever, intentionally connect those dots, if that makes sense.
I got it. Well, there's just a lot of naysayers out there. I think it's changing because we have so many movements right now that are a different path than, let's say, the 12 steps. And so I'm not sure. I don't remember if that is how you originally got sober through the 12 steps, but, what would you say to these naysayers? Because, we have you, we have, She Recovers, we have sober life. I mean, that's sober living, not sober living, sober full. We have different people going out there and kind of doing different things, which I think is great, you know, yoga and recovery, law of attraction and recovery. So, I mean, what would you say to someone who's like, no, 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 the foundation is the 12 steps. You need to start there.
I think that, you know, I did not get sober with the 12 steps. I didn't actually I did go to one AA meeting right before I published my book, This Naked Mind, my first book, just to, you know, really verify the information that I had in the book when I talked about it, because I had my own experiences from outside the 12 steps of what people told me, people who are in recovery kind of told me about that. And, you know, one of the main things that I was told was that, oh, Annie, you're not really an alcoholic. And so it was for me like, okay, so I don't fit her perception, this girl who was telling me this, who had been sober for, you know, about 7 years through AA, of being an alcoholic, but I'm still not happy. Like I'm still not at a place where I want to keep drinking as much as I am, but I can't, you know, just quitting or drinking less, that feels to be a miserable cycle too. So I was kind of left in this place where like, okay, well, I'm not truly an alcoholic. I don't really need AA. And this is what I was told, but I also like am not feeling good. So what do I do? And I think that's kind of where my work originated. And I think where it came out, it was obviously my own journey and my own story. Yeah, a lot of people were really upset with me. I think the noise has toned down quite a bit in the last 5 years, but in the early days, it was very much like, wow, that's, you know, you're going to be killing people if you tell them they don't need to go to meetings and they just need to read a book. And it was really scary for me because I was like, well, I'm just sharing my experience. Like that's all I'm doing. I'm just sharing my experience. And people didn't want that to be shared. And so I think that it is now, after selling, you know, almost 500,000 books and having hundreds of thousands of people like change their entire life, I would say that there isn't one right way at all. People are different. Our brains work different. What's important to us works different. How much we take or leave authority, how much we rebel against something like rules is different. And so it's really ignorant to think that one way is going to fix everybody. I think the best thing is to find what works for you and allow people to explore and find what works for them without judging them for it.
I would agree. I mean, there are some people that come into my office, I'm a therapist too, and you know, there's a difference even in the DSM diagnostic manual between being, you know, abusing alcohol, being an alcoholic, and then everybody just gets all caught up in the words and the verbiage. And, you know, the question is it working for you? And if you go into an AA meeting, you may really just be someone who's been abusing at different times of your life. You know, maybe you don't need to be abstinent. I mean, there's just, I don't know, there's just no one cut right answer. And I think that I think the people that are naysayers, maybe these are the ones that have just been so desperate and, you know, or they're just narrow-minded, but they just feel like they needed complete, you know, they needed just to be beat up. They just need to do exactly what they were being told, you know, take that direction, do whatever it took. And, you know, I get that if you ended up homeless or ended up losing everything, but I think you're absolutely right that there has to be different roads for different people. People cannot all relate to the 12 steps, can't relate to the big book. There's difference between alcoholism and abuse. And so we just have to find some of these gray areas. So I agree. What do you think, why do you think there's been such an increase in, you know, I'm going to say mommies and successful career women? You know, why? I mean, you know, I look at my own daughter, she's a high powered publicist. She's probably your age and probably got as successful as you at your age. And, you know, she's not an alcoholic, but I do notice that age group, in fact, she went to an open house for my little granddaughter, and it was 11 in the morning, and everybody's drinking to welcome the new mommy. So I guess we're going to talk about mommies, and we're going to talk about career women. Why such a growth in those areas, populations?
I think that, you know, it's really interesting because I know for me, when I was a young mom, it was very much like all the problems are solved by wine. And there was lots of confirmation of like, yeah, this is, you know, no good story ever started with the salad. That's why there's wine and all of this, these sort of things that really were like, okay, this is what you do. And I think the truth is that when we're in that vulnerable stage of our lives, alcohol in this day and age doesn't have the stigma that it used to quite as intensely in terms of like, women were like, okay, I'm seeing how much my husband's doing it. I don't necessarily want to do it. We've almost said, no, I'm claiming my power. If they can drink, I can drink too. If they can have boozy lunches, I can have boozy play dates. Like, I'm going to show up and be this, and so we've just been, and we really truly want to connect with each other. We want to be, there for each other. And so we're like, well, this is how we do it. So it's just a state of doing the best we can with the tools we have and being given this tool of, here's this tool, wine, this is the answer. And so we're like, okay, here we go. I mean, that's where I was. And then when I kind of woke up to it, it was really interesting because a lot of my friends were like, oh, wow, yeah, no, I haven't been feeling great about that either, and it depends if you go with, a preaching kind of mentality when they'll get defensive. But if you're just kind of like, look, this wasn't working for me, it's amazing how people are like, oh yeah, it wasn't working for me either. What were we doing? Oh my gosh, so it's really interesting. And I think the same with corporate women too, I was in both of those camps, both of those demographics, and with trying to keep up with the colleagues and the coworkers, and literally being told by my boss that the bar was where the deals were done. It was a lot like the golf course. And so I wanted to be good at it. And since we don't have this cautionary tale of like, hey, alcohol's addictive, it can ruin your life, we have the common knowledge as, oh, alcohol's addictive, but only to them. Those people over there who are alcoholics, yeah, as long as you're not in them, you're fine. And so we don't go into it with this because we're like, oh, we're not an alcoholic, fine, I can just go ahead and drink whatever I want, and it's no big deal. And sure, I'll drink to further my career. Sure, I'll drink at work functions and work dinners and sales events and et cetera, et cetera. And then, obviously it sneaks up on us.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's very worrisome. And right now, this will probably air while this coronavirus is still going on, I'm sure. And I'm very concerned that people are going to find this as a coping mechanism, to drink and to, stay home, and because they have nowhere to go. And that's a little worrisome. I think it just becomes for a lot of people, especially young people, it satisfies boredom for some reason.
Yeah, for sure, because it makes you less present to what's happening. So it's harder to feel bored when your brain, isn't quite functioning. And I mean, it's true. Alcohol sales have skyrocketed since this has started, and the pandemic has really been named.
Yeah, I didn't realize that, but I was thinking that was definitely going to happen. Any words of wisdom to those people that are thinking that's the way to go, that's their solution?
It's interesting. I think that this can be one of two things, right? Like, it can be the place where you really say, you know what, I'm going to draw a line in the sand here. I'm going to sit with this fear. I'm going to sit with the intensity. I'm going to feel this, and I'm going to make a change. And I'm going to actually use this time in this solitude to do the reading and the work and the inner knowledge to explore this and get honest with myself. Or you can do, what a lot of people are doing and numb it out. I would say that from a really practical perspective, the immune system is made up of 5 key functions, and alcohol negatively affects all 5 of them very dramatically. It's probably one of the worst things you can do. So if you're sitting here taking lots of vitamin C and washing your hands a lot, but you're drinking a lot, you are really, truly putting yourself in a detriment and making yourself more exposed. And I'd say that would go tenfold if you're over 60, right? So I feel like just from a pure, like, will I survive this standpoint, alcohol is a bad idea. So then you can take this choice of like, okay, that's scary. That's even scarier. Now you've scared me even more, Annie. Okay, well, what are you going to do with that fear? Are you going to use it? Are you going to channel it into actually making a change? Let this be the thing that, defines you, is just throwing up your hands and saying, oh, well, or is this going to be the thing that you're going to say no?
And then, we have to look at these communities like yours, that this is so positive, that you have an online community, that you have somewhere to go when you're kind of home right now trying to get through this. That's the good news, right? The internet is a gift really right now if you're looking to connect and reach out, and you don't want to go outside in the world. I think it's actually like a miracle, really, that we have the internet today for people to know what's going on in the world and to connect with other people. So what would you say to someone, still struggling with alcohol, the families that love them? I was married to an alcoholic, someone that just is sort of almost at the point of giving up hope for that loved one, and the person still struggling with drinking.
I think it's so multi-layered. First and foremost, I would say, really make sure to fill your own needs and take care of yourself so that you have something to give. I think so often before we start to take care of ourselves, we just start demanding from somebody who, if they're addicted, they're not going to be able to give you much of anything. And then that just perpetuates a really negative cycle because you're hoping for something that they actually can't give because it's, it's really deep and it's intense. And I also just, encourage that it isn't about you. It might really feel like it, like, oh, you can't quit. And do you just not love me enough? You can't do this. You said you're going to a million times and you never can. And it feels like you just don't love me enough. And, there's lots of education you can do around this, but it is something happening in their brain. Not that they don't love you enough. It's not a symptom. And that's, you can choose to focus and not give it that meaning. You can choose the meaning you give their addiction, and you can make it that they don't love you enough, or you can make it that they're really stuck and they're actually stuck in a very neurological place, and hopefully, show up, because over and over the people who have said that their loved ones did actually help them, it's when they came with compassion and with understanding and with, saying, hey, I'm here for you, but I'm gonna get my own needs filled over here.
Exactly. What this idea that it's a brain disease? I know you talk a lot about the neurology, I guess the neurology or the brain. You talk about it like a brain disease. Do you think it's a brain disease once you ingest the alcohol, or do you think that it's still a brain disease after you get sober and, suddenly you're doing all of these positive things, you're no longer drinking? I always say, once I don't believe the quote disease, if it's a disease, starts, or the brain disease starts till you actually start drinking. To me, it feels like if you're sober, you're no different than anybody else. I mean, in my field, everybody likes to say alcoholics think differently. They're just different. They just don't think like we think. Well, is that true when they're drinking, or is that true when they're not drinking as well?
So there's a lot of layers to that question. I think the best way that I've found to describe what I believe, and of course we're always learning new things, so take this with, this is what I kind of have come to through my research, is that if you look at like type 1 and type 2 diabetes, right? Type 1 diabetes, I believe, is the one that you're born with. Like, you're born and your body can't regulate insulin and you have to have insulin shots. And type 2 is that you're constantly exposed to so much sugar that your body's insulin response goes off the wires.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden now you have to balance that. Now, in both instances, the outcome is the same. But I think that with alcohol, it's much more similar to when you're exposed to the toxin repeatedly. Yes, then it can manifest like a disease in terms of it does change your brain, and it can change your brain, but you're not born that way. This is something that manifests because of exposure. But then, yes, it can change your brain. It can actually, like, you can stop having as many dopamine receptors as you used to. Your brain can actually be, your prefrontal cortex can be permanently damaged by alcohol, to where you can't make decisions like you were able to before the alcohol was in your brain. And so then it starts to manifest very much like a disease. And yes, your brain does start to function differently, but it isn't because you were born with it. It's because you got it as an exposure to the toxin. Now, I will say the difference here is like fetal alcohol syndrome, for example. If somebody is born because they were exposed to the toxin in utero, it's the same thing. Then you can say, well, you're born with it. Well, yeah, only again, because you were exposed to the toxin in utero. And so then you get down the conversation of like, well, what about genetics? What about and sure, there are certain genes that do show up with the propensity, but there's no gene that defines it, because there's genes in people who don't ever have a problem with alcohol, the same genes as people who do. There isn't something you can find this gene and test for it and say, yes, this is the thing, right? Not to mention that with the whole idea of one of, I think, the bigger indicators is what was your family life like? And so while you say, well, I have this history of alcohol abuse, if from a traumatic perspective, you were raised in a home where drinking was prevalent, and therefore possibly violence, and possibly, just not feeling safe and feeling out of control, then your desire to numb your human experience is going to be higher, and your brain is going to tell you, oh, the tool to do that is alcohol. And so, yes, there is a link between people who are raised in alcoholic homes who go on to drink at alcoholic levels, but it isn't, and we say, well, that must be genetics. No, not necessarily. It can totally be circumstantial, because alcohol, when you have trauma in your life and you have that first drink, your brain actually reacts differently because you're drinking, when you're drinking socially, you aren't numbing a pain that exists. When you have pain and you drink and it numbs it, your brain says, whoa, where's this thing been all my life, right? So again, people, and usually in my experience, when people say, wow, it really changed, I used to just be able to take it or leave it. I mean, for me, I didn't drink in college barely ever. I can count the numbers of time I drank in college, like on one hand, it was, and I never thought about it. It was not part of my experience. And then if I look back and I'd be like, oh, but then after my second son was born, and I had really bad postpartum depression, and I was stressed out at work, and I started to self-medicate. And with most people, unless, either you had a very traumatic upbringing, that first drink, oh, life feels okay. Where has this been all my life? Boom, because you're addressing the intense pain, and alcohol does numb pain in the short term. But then again, most people will be like, well, it changed in my divorce. I remember that. Yeah, it was different after that. I started, when you start self-medicating with alcohol is a much higher indicator than something genetic. But again, I would say, I can't sit here and take a stance. Is it a disease? Is it not disease? I think, I'll leave that for the experts. What I will say is that you don't become an alcoholic. You don't start drinking at alcoholic levels unless you are ingesting alcohol.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I just sometimes get a little frustrated with some of the, the stigma, like for instance, I have one client and, he's about as normal as they come, if whatever normal means, but he became an alcoholic after he, had an affair, and he started, lying to his wife and, cheating and this and that. It didn't align with his values. And then his alcoholism went boom. But if you were to sit and say to him, have a conversation with him about, has he ever lost a job? Did he ever, did he come from abuse? All the things that we talk about, oh, he's definitely an alcoholic. He thinks like an alcoholic. He really isn't. He just went through an enormous amount of pain by, going through this affair and not being, honest with his wife. And then the alcoholism just, spiraled. So everybody's different. And that's the whole thing. Like there is not one road here. There's not one road how you get it or you become one or become, it all varies. So I think that's what you're trying to say. Correct?
Exactly.
All right. Well, what is next for Annie, and how can we find you? How can we find your programs, and how can people reach you and your book and so forth?
Well, you can find me at thisnakedmind.com, or if you're curious about the 30-day challenge for yourself, that's at alcoholexperiment.com. It's free. It will always be free. And it's a 30-day just reset. You get videos and emails every single day. And I think what's next for us is we're really looking to create more of a membership site with a lot more of my curriculum and community within it, so that people can, on an ongoing basis, instead of just doing a program and then leaving, just continue to get their needs addressed.
That's excellent. I think that'll be great to have constant community and constant access to you. Is there anything else you want to share? Any hope that you'd like to instill to our readers, viewers?
Yeah, just say, especially, if we're still in the midst of this corona thing when you're listening to me, is that, we can use all of these challenges to become the best versions of ourselves. We can use it as fuel. We can use the fear as energy. We can use this. And when we use stuff like this, we can catapult, quartz crystals, they're beautiful, but they're created because something goes wrong. Diamonds are created under pressure, and the analogies go on and on and on, is that like, we don't have to just give up right now. We really can look at this as an opportunity to become the best version of ourselves.
Exactly. Perfect. Well, thank you, Annie. Thank you so much. Stay safe, stay healthy.
All right. Thank you, Sherry.
Okay. Bye.